Ho ho ho, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this year's Let's Dev Holiday Special, featuring some big balls. That's right, last time we started work on our extra large version of a snowball fight, featuring tractors and big snowballs. We focused heavily on the player control, including an acceleration system and turning controls based on the mouse's position. And unfortunately at the time, I forgot an important piece of code to make the turning code work properly. Gathering snow to build gigantic balls was also added to the game, as well as the tossing of said snowballs, a feature I somehow completely forgot to cover in the episode. But despite some rocky areas, we managed to make some progress which we continue to further with today's plan. Today we will continue to refine the existing features by making snowball throwing more dynamic. We will also add an enemy unit to toss our giant balls at. And finally, we'll make those snowballs interact with the tractors themselves and the environment around them. Now, spoiler warning, this one's gonna be rough, so let's not waste any more time and get to the coding. First thing up was a snowball throwing. For some reason, I decided the best way to handle dynamic throwing speeds would be to measure the snowball's size in percentages and multiply them by the max speed of the tractors. Now, this obviously did not work as I expected. What I think was supposed to happen is the larger the ball, the faster/further it would travel. Because yes, I have no idea how snow works. I'm a grown man who has never seen snow in his entire life, and therefore I'm making this up as I go along. Anyway, I'm forgoing all details right now because I tried to get this to work for about an hour and a half, and I got nowhere. Because the logic makes no sense. So try as I might, this was a dud from every attempted approach. Although I managed to add friction to the balls in there at some point. I should also probably mention at this point that I recorded this after a long day. I was tired and severely overestimated the situation. Regardless, at some point I finally gave up and moved on to something else. Up next, I started working on the enemy, which are almost entirely built the same as the player. And had I been in the right state of mind, would have simply had both share the same code. Anyway, much like the player, it runs on an acceleration/turning system, and for now would always move towards the player. And for the first time in almost 2 hours, something finally worked properly. The enemy chased the player around, slowly turning and accelerating as it should. So back in the enemy code, I added a chance for their attention to be drawn to a random spot on the map. And despite being a little weird, this at least prevented the enemy from constantly following and bullying the player. And speaking of which, next up I added some ball generation code to the enemy, as well as a chance to toss said ball. And so far so good, the enemy would ride around, building snowballs and often tossing them immediately. Not the most sophisticated of AI, but we're not aiming for anything groundbreaking for this project. So with that working, I added a check for colliding snowballs. If both snowballs had been tossed, then, well, it was time to math again. The idea here being each snowball would chip down the other based on their respective sizes, and any snowballs chipped down to 0 or below would be destroyed. That way snowballs could also be used as temporary shields. And once again, the math was wrong, which would just result in snowballs destroying each other. Another 30 minutes or so were spent trying to make this work before I threw in the towel and decided to come back the next day. The next day, the first thing I decided to fix were the snowball collisions. Tractors were meant to be knocked back when hit by snowballs, something I botched so badly I purposely avoided mentioning until now. So I went in, added knockback specific variables, and added knockback motion on top of whatever tractor movement is already occurring. And the amount of knockback provided would be determined by the ball's size, which was determined using the ball's scale, something I should have been using all this time. This, coupled with some knockback friction, resulted in some great bounce effect whenever tractors were hit by snowballs. So to keep on this bounce train, I added similar knockback effects for tractor-on-tractor collisions. This resulted in some hilariously janky yet fun bumper car style chaos. While the issue could have and probably should have been fixed, I decided to keep it for the sheer chaos factor. Next, I tried to expand on the AI with the addition of targeting random fellow enemies. However, the code I've used to do this in the past ended up Thanos snapping enemies out of existence. So that idea was nixed, and instead I simply had the enemies target the center of the screen. And despite looking like a game full of undecisive players, the results were much better than what we had previously. So next I decided to return to the Snowball Throw code and try once more. This time I used the ball's scale size to determine the movement speed of the ball, which would be based off the tractor speed at the time of their throw. In other words, something like inertia, which, surprise surprise, ended up actually working. Who would have thought? All it would take is proper logic, the correct math, and a sound mind. Huh. Anyway, moving on, I wanted to attempt to fix the snowball on snowball collisions. So much like the throw code, I used the ball scale to determine the size differences between the two colliding balls. And much like before, if the ball is small enough, it's destroyed. Otherwise, we'd scale them down and add a bit of push to the ball so that they were no longer colliding. And for some reason, this ended up sometimes adding to the snowballs, making the big balls even bigger. So to prevent this, I then moved the scaling clamp to always be active instead of just during the growth process. This kind of fixed the issue, but still resulted in some weird behaviors with the ball sizes. However, nothing was obviously broken, so I considered it a win. And there we had it. After 3 hours, we were where we could have been in 1, if I had just instead gone to bed the previous night. If there's one thing that's been consistent throughout this series, it's that coding while tired never works out. Unfortunately, if I want to get Let's Dev episodes out as frequently as I do, I have like little to no choice. So remember, don't do as I do, and always code responsibly. Anyway, we've managed to get the bulk of what I expected to do with this project done, and we've still got a lot of month left to go. So going forward, I'm just gonna wing it and turn up the insanity. But for now, I could really use the rest. So that brings us to the end of today's episode of the Let's Dev Holiday Special. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on our progress in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.